Another fantastic match to head down to the feature match area for. Let's find out how modern goes for Finland versus Belarus. Hello and welcome to this, our third set of quarterfinals here at the World Magic Cup. We can see our players sat down in the feature action area. Let's meet our teams.
Matti Kuisma.
Tuomas Tuominen.
Leo Lahonen.
Lauri Pispa.
1, 2, 3. Torilla tavataan!
Глеб.
Дмитрий Андронович.
Павел Медведский. Гоша.
And we're going to be kicking off our quarterfinals here with the matchup on our bat table. That one probably what we think is going to be the quickest of the matches that we're going to have in this quarterfinals. That being Leo Lahonen on Blue-Red Kilnfiend and his opponent there, Pavel Medvedsky on Affinity. Both of these decks can be explosive, but Red-Blue, one of the most explosive decks in the whole format.
Yes, with the Kilnfiend and Teamwork Battle Rage, you can easily win on turn 3, and we've even seen Leo deal 19 points of damage by turn 2. This deck is crazy aggressive.
And looking at the hand that Lahonen is working with here, it's not got the Monastery Swift Spears or similar that we see from the most aggressive starts, but Thing in the Ice, that could prove pretty powerful against Affinity, right?
Especially against Affinity, yes. I think that's actually a card that makes this deck viable. You have such a good game against decks like Dredge and Affinity because suddenly you can bounce every other permanent except for Spellskite. And yeah, just put a Teamer Battle Rage on that thing.
And even though Affinity is a deck that can redeploy those cards quickly, sometimes you need a fairly small window. We see 4 permanents played by Affinity on the first turn there. Signal Pest, Mox Opal, Springleaf Drum, and that Darksteel Citadel. 4 artifacts already. The more artifacts, the merrier for this Affinity deck. Thing in the Ice coming down here. 4 counters to begin with. Each and every instant or sorcery will get it that much closer to transforming. And when transformed, well, a 7/8 horror that can do a lot of damage. But immediately we see Galvanic Blast and Mutagenic Growth enough to mean that 4-point burn spell not enough to deal with the big horror.
Yeah, crucial play there. Not only saving your one threat, but also removing the first counter.
Arcbound Ravager coming down, plenty of artifacts to feed to it, and indeed an Inkmoth Nexus. How important is the Nexus in terms of getting infect damage in this matchup?
I think this could be a good way to actually race the Kilnfiend deck. Your damage clock is usually a bit slower than your infect clock if you are willing to go all in. But you have to consider that there are lightning bolts in the Kilnfiend deck.
And we do know that there is Lightning Bolt in hand for Leo Lahonen, so this is something that these players are working with full deck lists. Now that we're in the top 8, there's the opportunity to make the most of that information. And we can see there Tuomas Tuominen, the coach for the Finnish team. Each team has one player that's not actively playing, but in these final elimination stages, they can refer to those deck lists at any time and provide useful feedback to their team members about cards to consider that perhaps means that there's a little bit more agency for the person in control of the deck to focus on individual plays.
You can see from Lahonen's hand how cheap this deck really is. A lot of the spells cost 0 or 1 mana if you're willing to pay the Phyrexian mana cost, paying life for it. And that means you can flip Thing in the Ice, you can transform Thing in the Ice, basically the turn after you played it.
So Gitaxian Probe reveals that there's an Island and Inkmoth Nexus in hand, so the path very much clear for Leo Lahonen here if he wants to go big. We will see exactly where he wants to go with this soon enough. The fact that so many spells in Blue-Red Kilnfiend are instants as well means that in principle Lahonen could wait till Pavel Medvedsky's turn to transform Thing in the Ice if he chooses to get aggressive with that Inkmoth Nexus.
Yeah, you have to weigh your options here. Attacking for 7 is certainly quite relevant as well.
So Lightning Bolt takes down Signal Pest and gets Thing in the Ice down to just a single counter left. At some point the horror may well awaken. And the time is now. Sleight of hand. First up removes the last counter and transforms Awoken Horror. All non-horrors getting returned to their owner's hands. Not too many horrors on Affinity's side of things, though worth noting that Spellskite is a horror, so that one may prove relevant at some point. So 7-8 coming in. There is potential for it to be more. And there comes the big Kraken. 20 life, fast becoming 13. It's 13 life points apiece here between our two teams here, Finland and Belarus. In this, our first match, of course, we have got 3 matches going on between us. We'll get a chance to see a little bit of Dredge versus Bantel Drazi, or maybe even some Lantern Control versus Jun before this match is out.
The way that the Affinity deck is constructed, it is super linear. It wants to just play its own game, especially in game 1. And that makes it so tough to deal with Thing in the Ice or Awoken Horror. Galvanic Blast was a good way, and it was timed perfectly, but Mutagenic Growth foiled that plan.
So Pavel Miedvedski having to rebuild here. What's his sort of ideal line, assuming that he can get to pick his draws, I guess?
I think he has to go for an all-in strategy with Inkmoth Nexus. Put a plating on it, and hope that 2 attacks with the Infect lands can get him to victory. He can play this slower, which I think we are seeing here, but I don't think that he wants to get into a defensive mode against the 7-8.
Arcbound Ravager is the play here for Miedvedski. Couple of copies of Inkmoth Nexus available to him here.
Yeah, the problem being that he had only 4 mana available. He already used up his land drop for the turn.
You have 1 card in hand?
Just the 1 card left in hand, and I think that Lahonen knows that that's an island. He saw it from the Gitaxian probe a little earlier, so that information pretty relevant for this kind of a deck in various matchups, just being able to tell when it's worth it going for it and when not. Arcbound Ravager activating Springleaf Drum in order to let that Inkmoth Nexus get animated. Pavel Miedvedski wants to get as much value out of that Arcbound Ravager as he can.
Yeah, that's a nice interaction. Lahonen needs to consider if he wants to let that resolve or if he uses this to get rid of the Nexus.
So a second copy of Sleight of Hand from the game being cast here. Just sees a couple of lands, and am I right in thinking that this blue-red deck really doesn't want to see many lands past about its third?
Oh, absolutely. Because you just don't need them. You can sometimes cast a few spells so that you can use up, let's say, 4, maybe 5 mana in a turn, but that's rather unusual.
But if we're talking about drawing lands, the same story on both sides of things, a mountain and an island in hand for Miedvedski here. He plays the island, which was the one that Leo Lahonen knew about, left with just a mountain in hand and now weighing up his options. A couple of copies of Inkmoth Nexus and a Cranial Plating to work with here.
Yes, but no way to deal 10 in a single turn. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 artifacts if both Nexus are activated. So even in the best case, it wouldn't be lethal.
Now, Miedvedski has activated the Nexus that does not have a +1/+1 counter here. What might be the reason for that?
The reason is that he was trying to play around a removal spell. His expectation is that this will not be a lethal attack. So if Lahonen spends a removal spell here, he'll have the more powerful Inkmoth Nexus for next turn.
We are hearing that in spite of having said that this might be the quickest matchup, there has already been a game win, and it is for Finland. Matti Kuisma with Dredge picking off the first game against Ihar Klionski, playing Bant Eldrazi. So good news for Team Finland. Worth noting that Finland were the 7th seed, so they had to be on the draw in each one of these 3 matchups against 2nd seed Belarus. And we know that in Modern, being on the play, a big deal. Well, all of a sudden, a lot of burn being unloaded there by Leo Lahonen, and that able to clear up game 1. He didn't like the idea of being too far behind on time compared to his countrymen. 2 game wins already for Finland. Great position for them, and just 1 match going for them still, that being the one for Lauri Pispa. We will be back with that match after these messages.
Up your game with Ultra Pro Magic the Gathering accessories. Find the best magic art on card sleeves, deck boxes, playmats, and more. Visit ultrapro.com to learn more and find a retailer near you. Got an over-the-top standard deck that's ready to bust the format wide open? Sleeve up and throw down at Standard Showdown tournaments for a chance to win sweet prizes. 4 weeks only every Saturday from November 26th through December 17th. Lock in your game at magic.wizards.com/Standard Showdown.
Hello and welcome back to this, our 3rd quarterfinal here at the World Magic Cup. We're going to get a chance to see a little bit of one of the slower decks that we have in our top 8. Lauri Pispa there of Team Finland, the team captain for Finland, is playing Lantern Control, and there you see his opponent, Dmitry Andronchik on Jund. And if we had to sum up where we're at this game at this point, where are we right now, Simon?
Jund is able to attack because there is no ensnaring bridge on the battlefield, and the Lantern Control deck is trying to stem the bleeding. Pithing Needle just came down, disabling Raging Ravine, so only Kalitas remains as a threat.
And on 10 life, Lauri Pispa does not have very much time to find an answer here. He has the Lantern of Insight, that one of the things that this deck is named after, that means that we can see the top card of each player's deck. And he is able to mill cards from the top of each player's deck. However, without an ensnaring bridge, he is just facing down creatures that can attack, and there are very, very few creatures to block with for Lauri Pispa in his entire deck. Dmitry Andronchik. He is gaining life from the lifelink on Kalitas, Traitor of Get. That life, not particularly important in this matchup.
No, actually the trigger from Inventor's Fair much more important, because the Lantern deck is the one that needs to stay alive to establish a lock.
The other thing that Inventor's Fair can do, of course, is to search up an artifact, and Ensnaring Bridge is basically the one thing that's going to be able to keep Lauri Pispa in this game, but there are answers to artifacts in Jund.
Oh yeah, this is why this matchup is so difficult. The Abrupt Decays and Kolaghan's Command that are already in Jund's main deck mean that there are a lot more natural ways to answer Ensnaring Bridge and other artifacts.
So Pixis of Pandemonium looks to have been doing good work, and that kind of a tricky spot. We see it activated. There is an Ensnaring Bridge on top now for Lauri Pispa, but look at what's on top on the other side of things. Maelstrom Pulse is one of the ways that Jund is going to be able to deal with problem artifacts on the other side of the board.
Yes, and that's where it's important that you have cards to mill your opponent with that do not take your card away.
Now, we saw a nice play there from Dmitry Andronchik in response to an activation that was going to mill away that Maelstrom Pulse. Fetch land gets cracked. That means that there's going to be a shuffle for the Belarusian player. He's going to have a chance to leave that Maelstrom Pulse in his deck, potentially have a card that's less pertinent to this game state, get exiled. Or get put in the graveyard, sorry.
Maximizing his chances of drawing out despite how his draws are being manipulated.
Yeah, not too much work left for the Jund deck to do here if it can just find a way past the ensnaring bridge that is looming on top of Larry Pispa's deck.
Nyt tarvitaan niinku huono nosto tuolla. Koska mä en voi millään tätä.
So, touch away.
So the shuffle has been completed. We're going to get a chance to see what is now on top, and there is still a mill going on. So Liliana of the Veil, how important is a Planeswalker like Liliana in this matchup?
Not all that important. You have the -6 ultimate, but Lantern Control plays 3 to 4 Pithing Needle to stop exactly those kind of tricky abilities. And usually you want to empty your opponent's hand if you're playing Jund. The problem is Lantern Control with their 4 ensnaring bridges. That's exactly what they're aiming to do anyway.
Yeah, the entirety of the Lantern Control deck, very, very low to the ground in terms of costs, just so that you can empty your hand simply by playing it most of the time.
Mut sit se ei käyttänytkään sitä.
Larry Pispa is just counting up the number of cards that have been exiled with Pixies of Pandemonium on each side. Now, one of the cool things in this team play is where you have coaches involved, specifically for Lantern Control, there's a lot of information that you can keep track of in terms of what cards have been exiled, what cards are in people's deck list. And look at that, Maelstrom Pulse on top of the deck after all of that shuffling and milling. Dmitry Andronchik is going to be very happy to see that one. There is a Ghoul Caller's Bell available for Larry Pispa, but he's going to have to use it now, and with an ensnaring bridge on top of his deck, using it is really going to hurt.
Yes, that was amazing. The cracking of the Fashland to protect Maelstrom Pulse really paying off here for Dimitri.
3 tosta, ja sit 3 pultista, ja sit jos tällä hakee sen.
You can hear much discussion going on from Team Finland about how to play this one out from here. A tough spot for them.
Mut sit me saadaan laippi, me mennään 4. Sit me mennäs.
If he absolutely has to, he can activate the Lantern of Insight to force a shuffle, but at that point, playing in the dark, a little bit of a scary place to be.
It would reduce his 3 other artifacts, the Pixies, the Bell, and the Codex Shredder, to not being very effective at all. So then he would have to search for another Lantern again. It's really a difficult spot. Something that's really good though for Lantern players is that they usually have a lot of ways to get artifacts back from their graveyard. So one card we actually see already is the Codex Shredder, and that's a good way to just buy back a card that you really wanted.
So Lantern of Insight does get sacrificed, and you can see there crossed fingers for Larry Pispa. He's now going to have to hope that everything works out for the next turn cycle or so. Ensnaring Bridge on top, so he knows that he's going to have that going on, but there are lots of problem cards in Jund. You can already see a Kolagun's Command in the graveyard. We've seen Maelstrom Pulse on top of the deck a number of times now. This is definitely a moment for Team Finland to have a little bit of a sweat.
They say I'm the shuffle master, so I even shuffle yours too well.
Larry Pispa there suggesting that he has been described as the shuffle master. We will see how lucky or not that shuffle proves to be for Dmitry Andronchik soon enough. Well, Collective Brutality plus Lightning Bolt plus an attack from Kalatas Traitor Get. That's 3, 6, 8 damage. And with 8 life, Larry Pispa could be all out of luck here. It may well be, yep, we are on to game 2. We see Belarus picking up a game there. That their first game win in this series. Plenty more Magic to be played though. Finland leading in the Dredge and Blue-Red Kilnfiend match, but Lantern Control falling in game 1 with Jund. And we're going to get a chance to see a bit more of that Blue-Red Kilnfiend deck right now. Leo Lahonen will be playing his second game against Pavel Miedvedski's Affinity deck. Now they've sideboarded. How much is likely to change in this matchup?
One card that's very, very relevant is Shatterstorm. It gives the Blue-Red Kilnfiend deck something else than going all in on a single creature. They can just wipe Affinity's board for 4 mana, and that's something that Belarus has to be very aware of.
So you see Pavel there, just showing his teammate the hand that he's going to be working with. He's on the play for this game, starts off with an Inkmoth Nexus and a pass. That a relatively low-key start for Affinity. We have seen Affinity able to deploy 3, maybe 4 permanents on the first turn.
You are hoping for those turn ones that are super explosive, usually powered by Mox Opal, but the average turn where the deck really explodes is turn 2.
Yeah, each of these decks low to the ground and has the potential to make a lot happen in the early turns. Leo Lahonen here, considering his options fairly carefully before he even plays his first land of the game. I guess that when you don't have very many turns that you're expecting to play, each one counts.
Yeah, it does look like the Affinity deck does not have a lot of sideboard cards that are useful against Kilnfiend decks. Actually, 1 Chalice of the Void in the sideboard, it's just coming down, and that is the only card I could make out that's really, really valuable in this matchup.
Chalice the Void on 1, we know that the vast majority of the deck being played by Leo Lahonen does cost 1 to cast. I mean, at some point we may see Shatterstorm and so on, but that's definitely going to put a crimp in Leo Lahonen's plan.
Actually, I misspoke. It's a Shattering Spree, not a Shatterstorm, but it's effectively the same concept. It even gets around Chalice of the Void because the copies are not being cast, so you only lose one of the effects. And
of course, I suppose, when you're looking at a Monastery Swiftspear on the table, correct me if I'm wrong, every spell that you cast, you're casting it and it's getting countered, so you're still getting a prowess trigger.
Oh, absolutely. It's just asking you to put it on the stack, not what happens afterwards.
But Leo Lahonen definitely needs to consider a little bit more carefully what he's doing with the Chalice in play. Just getting a hit in for 1 here with Monastery Swiftspear to kick things off, and following it up with a 2-drop in Thing in the Ice. That one will not be countered by Chalice of the Void, at least not the one that's in play.
No, and Leo has a basic island here. Understandably, he plays more islands than mountains, 3 versus 1. But it does mean that his Shattering Spree is quite a bit worse unless he gets to cast Manamorphose.
Still Overseer the play for Pavel Miedvedski. That one of the cards that is at its height when you do have those crazy first turns where you play lots of 0-cost creatures. But it's still a 1-1 that will gradually make things bigger. And with 3 different Nexi on the board, 2 Inkmoth, 1 Blinkmoth, there are more creatures lurking on the table for Pavel than it may first appear.
Yes, and if you do the math, land, animate both Inkmoth, attack for 4, next turn attack for 6, that's 10 poison. So even on this board, it's presenting a 2-turn clock, assuming there's another mana source. Lahonen
looking at a hand where there are almost certainly a few spells that are not going to achieve very much. But remember how we were talking about the way that Prowess interacts with Chalice of the Void. A similar sort of thing going on with Thing in the Ice. A Vapor Snag being cast there into the Chalice of the Void and immediately countered. But look at these counters being removed from Thing in the Ice. Gitaxian Probe also being countered here, but suddenly we're going from 4 counters on that Thing in the Ice all the way down to 0 in a single turn, and that means that there are still going to be able to be some big attacks from Leo Lahonen here.
But what an amazing Chalice of the Void. 1-off sideboard card just countered 4 of Leo's premium blue spells.
And Leo also had to return a Monastery Swiftspear that now is going to get cast into the Chalice of the Void and simply countered if he tries to put it down again. So it's all in on this Awoken Horror for Leo Lahonen.
Something that's quite relevant, by the way, is that Affinity itself does not play a lot of 1 mana cards. The most common one you'll see is actually Vault Scourge, which has a casting cost of 2. So only Signal Pass and Springleaf Drum being really affected.
So Pavel Medvedsky has enough creatures that he's able to put something in the way, but there's a Temur Battle Rage, and that makes that a gigantic Awoken Horror. In spite of the fact that there was possibly the best sideboard card available to Pavel Medvedsky, a very quick win again for this blue-red Kilnfiend deck, and that means that Team Finland gets its first match on the board, and you can see Pavel Medvedsky just walking away from the table there. That's got to be a loss that's going to sting. Now we have plenty more Magic going on. We're going to get a chance to jump across to one of our other tables now. We've already seen Leo Lahonen pick up his first match win for Finland. I believe we're going to get to see how Matti Kuisma's Dredge deck does against Igor Klionski in Game 2. Klionski on Banteldrazi, Kuisma on Dredge. Dredge was the first match to pick up a win anyway here. We're going to get a chance to see exactly why it is that we saw such a quick game in Game 1 here. And this time round, it will be Belarus on the play once more, trying to pick up some very valuable wins here.
Yes, we talked about this matchup before, and we believe that Game 1 is almost unwinnable for Banteldrazi because you just don't have the tools to interact with the graveyard. This changes after sideboarding, where the Banteldrazi deck in this case brings in 2 Rest in Peace and a Grafdigger's Cage. So that's already 3 really, really strong hate cards against the graveyard. And we'll see what else Belarus has planned for this matchup.
So Noble Hierarch coming down on the first turn for Banteldrazi. A little bit of acceleration there. This deck does have some of the more expensive spells that we see getting cast in Modern these days in some of the Eldrazi. Matti Kuisma carefully weighing up his hand. I can see a Lightning Axe in there, which may well prove relevant. You don't necessarily need to wait for a gigantic monster to kill. Sometimes it's a matter of take out your accelerants.
Oh, actually very often. Getting rid of Noble Hierarch on turn 1 sets the Eldrazi deck back by quite a lot.
And considering there was an Eldrazi Temple on turn 2, that could have been a gigantic play. As it is, even without an Eldrazi to play on turn 2, there is a very big play indeed. Rest in Peace coming down, exiling both graveyards, and until that Rest in Peace gets dealt with, if a card or token we put into a graveyard from anywhere, instead it gets exiled. This has to be one of the most high-impact cards in this entire matchup.
Absolutely. It's not only does it deal with the graveyards as they were, it also prevents the graveyard from growing again. Compared to a card like Tormod Script, for example. So this is where Dredge is one of the few decks that actually needs answers to the answers. And that's the reason why we're seeing For Nature's Claim in Dredge sideboards.
So we've seen powerful sideboard cards from Belarus in both of our matches post-board here. What is it that Dredge is looking to do here? It has quite a lot of card drawing. Is it simply a matter of finding a way to disenchant Rest in Peace? Is it possible for it to win with that in play?
It's theoretically possible, but super unlikely. Because with an active Rest in Peace, you don't even get the huge Golgari Grave Trolls going that you would otherwise need if you really want to start paying mana for your creatures. So Rest in Peace is just one of these cards that you have to find a way to deal with.
So Matti Kuisma just casting Faithless Looting, no opportunity to flash it back as it gets exiled when cast. And he's just going to have to hope he can find an answer relatively fast, because the other thing is that while Banteldrazi, not known as being a super swift deck, the creatures it deploys are big for their converted mana cost, and with Eldrazi Temple they come down just a little bit faster.
Yeah, we could see a Reality Smasher next turn. So that would be a 3-turn clock, most likely.
Kuisma here, dig, fetches up a Blood Crypt, end of turn.
Taking a look at Igor's hand, he actually has a Drown of Hope. That's 7 points of power that can arrive next turn.
We're just making sure that even if the exile zone is not very much use to Matti Kuisma, that we can at least see it so we can get a feel for where we're at in this match, what cards have been relevant. We'll keep them on camera there for you. Another copy of Lightning Axe in hand for Matti Kuisma, so he's going to be able to deal with some of the big threats that come down from the Banteldrazi side of things. Cathartic Reunion here it hurts a lot more when those cards that are being discarded are not going to the graveyard.
Oh, absolutely. And you can also see in his hand, Life from the Loam doesn't do anything. The additional discard on Lightning X is a lot more painful. And even if you find that Nature's Claim that you're looking for, suddenly you don't have that reunion in hand anymore to actually kickstart your game.
Draws into another copy of Cathartic Reunion. Just reminded that that does go into exile as well. Nothing is going to end up in any graveyards while Rest in Peace is in play.
The teams that are doing well this tournament are certainly respecting Dredge. They might not be playing it themselves, but you can see the good preparation here. Of course, Rest in Peace is not an unknown quantity, but we saw Italy and Germany play Ravenous Traps. I'm sure a lot of other teams had it as well, because it's this instant speed Tormod script effect that the opponent doesn't know about.
It's interesting because Dredge is one of those decks that the pieces have been bubbling under for a while now, and it's taken these last few sets, Prized Amalgam getting into the mix, and then Cathartic Reunion to just push it right up into the top tier in Modern. But a big drowner of hope here means that in spite of having drawn up Prized Amalgam, Matti Kuisma may be looking to game 3 here if he's going to win this match for Finland.
Yes, I'm afraid so. That's the price you pay for playing such a powerful deck. It's a little similar to Affinity in that you get one of the best Game 1 decks of the format. However, there are these sideboard cards which are super disruptive.
Of course, in this unified Modern, the sideboard cards having to be shared out just as the main deck cards are a little bit of a problem for some decks, perhaps. Another Cathartic Reunion coming now for Team Finland. Discarding and, of course, exiling more cards, desperately digging, and 2 Narcomoebas, a terrible draw for Dredge, even when they do have access to their graveyard. Especially so, though, in this circumstance, because there's not even a way of casting them.
Yes, and you mentioned how Dredge has risen to the top of Modern. In fact, of course, the other deck that was prominently featured this weekend, and both of them got cards from Kaladesh, Cathartic Reunion and Blossoming Defense, to get them one step closer to just the best deck in the format. It's actually an interesting discussion now, what you would want to play, in fact, Dredge or something else altogether. Reevaluate how the metagame looks like.
Well, Finland now with that hit down to single digits, just 6 points of life, and ample ways of dealing that damage on the Belarusian side of the table. We may be on to our next match. There we see it. All right, Belarus picks up a game there. So Finland may lead, having one full match in the bag, but that one's going to go to game 3, and we're going to get a chance to see a little bit more of Larry Pispa versus Dmitry Andronchik, and that is where where Belarus already hold the lead. And by the looks of things, that match just kicking off now. We know that the Lantern Control deck is one of the decks that can take a little bit longer to get to its wins. We don't want to hold it back too much. And there we see Dmitry Andronchik. He actually already has a pretty important sideboard card in play. Just at the bottom of our screen there, we can see a Leyline of the Void. Now, what does Leyline do in this matchup?
Yeah, it might be a bit surprising to see the Leyline. But there are a lot of cards that interact with the Lantern's graveyard, and the main reason is you want to prevent the Lantern deck from using cards like Codex Shredder or Academy Ruins to recur their ensnaring bridges that prevent you from winning.
We can see that Larry Pispa already has Inventor's Fair on the battlefield. That one potentially a helpful one to find the key pieces of the puzzle that you need to get your whole lock going. And I'm actually hearing from Marshall Sutcliffe on the floor that Larry noted that he actually missed a trigger on it to gain a life in the first game, and he believes that that point of life was relevant for that one extra turn he needed to be able to play Ensnaring Bridge. So that's going to be one he's going to be thinking about for a while. He is going to have to shake that thought off, though, though, if he wants to come back in this match, focus on the game at hand. A couple of copies of Lantern of Insight already in play, but still plenty to do if he's going to establish his full lock. The lucky shuffles from Larry Pisper there, hoping to leave something relatively harmless on top. At this stage in the game, while there are still cards in hand for Pisper, Liliana of the Veil perhaps a little bit more exciting than she might be later on. Her ultimate, of course, very good against a cluttered board.
Oh yeah, you don't want the ultimate to happen. That is just a bit too strong. Dark Confident, by the way, a very strong card in this matchup, simply because you are somehow trying to grind your opponent out of resources, just in a somewhat different way than what we're used to. So getting rid of those Dark Confidence is very important for the Lantern control player.
Yeah, I guess the Dark Confidant also, depending on the number of mill effects, cards that are going to get cards off the top of your opponent's deck, it gives you a few extra attempts to draw into something in one turn.
Effectively, yes. And just in the beginning of the game, these effects are not all in place. You usually don't have the lock assembled as early as turn 2. So a few unfiltered draw steps for Jund allows them to craft the perfect hand, and then it's really difficult to come back as Lantern control. You're playing a game against the hand almost more than against the board.
And of course, in the meantime, Dark Confidant does attack for 2. This is not a deck that does a huge amount of blocking on the other side of the table for Finland.
Yeah, we should mention what happened right there. One of the lanterns was sacrificed to shuffle a Thoughtseize from Laurie's library, and that was because he was looking to draw. A black source to enable the 3 Abrupt Decays that he's holding in his hand. That didn't quite work out, so now he's going for a more aggressive route to get his black mana.
Ghost Quarter on your own land. It's not exactly efficient in terms of the number of lands you end up with in play, but it does sort out your colors. So you sacrifice Ghost Quarter, destroy one of your own lands, and that means that you get to search up a basic land and put it onto the battlefield untapped. So at the end of all of that, Larry Pisper has kind of sacrificed 2 land drops in order to get the 1 land that he needs in play. But we do know that this is a deck that has the potential, at least, to run Crucible of Worlds to get lands back from the graveyard. I'm not quite sure whether or not Lowry has chosen that route with his exact build. It's something that has moved around a little bit and has become more popular since Inventors Fair has been an option. There we see the Abrupt Decay taking out Dark Confidant, colloquially known as Bob, because it was originally designed by Bob Maher upon his winning of the Magic Invitational. You can see his face there on the version that Dmitry Andronchik playing. Grim Lavamancer on the top of the deck, though. That's an interesting one in this matchup.
Yes. Note that the Leyline of the Void only affects Pisper's graveyard, so Andronchik has cards in his graveyard. Something that's really interesting is the inclusion of Grafdigger's Cage from Lantern Control, of course a sideboard card. It does, for example, prevent Ancient Grudge flashbacks.
We can see Ensnaring Bridge on top of Larry Pisper's deck there. Very important if he's going to stop attacks from Andronchik, though, of course, when you look at what Jund is doing, it has a lot of very relevant cards. Ancient Grudge in hand for Andronchik, Kolagan's Command on top of his deck. So many different, very meaningful ways of interacting in this matchup, and that's something that not many decks in this format can say.
Absolutely. This is why this matchup is not so favorable. I think Lantern Control was a great choice for this tournament, also because the amount of Jund decks was actually quite low.
Now, what is the reason for that? Is it to do with the unified deck construction rules?
Exactly. It's just competing for a lot of cards regarding mana bases, regarding lightning bolts, regarding discard spells. So it's generally a bit easier to choose not to include it.
So Ensnaring Bridge comes down. There's a Scavenging Ooze available for Andronchik now, though not so many cards in graveyards to eat with it. Land on the top there revealed off the Lantern of Insight in play. The one saving grace for Larry Pispa here is that in spite of whatever mana woes he may have had, it's even worse on the Belarusian side of the table. Just the 2 lands in play for Andronchik. We can see that there's another one on top of the deck. 2 lands is enough to be able to use things like the Ancient Grudge in hand, but I'm sure that it would be far, far easier for Belarus if they were simply hitting land drops each and every turn.
Absolutely, and here what you kind of want to do is to get rid of the Grafdigger's Cage, so that you can flash back the Ancient Grudge to get rid of Ensnaring Bridge, but that will cost you a lot of time. The real question, however, is if Finland, if Lantern Control is actually doing enough in this game. Without a Codex Shredder-like effect, I don't really see how you want to stop Jun from hitting the 3rd land drop and then having all those cards available to them.
It looks like Pispa maybe considering activating his Lantern of Insight to get another shuffle here. Glimmer Void on top of his deck, not super exciting, and denying a land to your opponent at this point, kind of interesting.
The problem is if you shuffle away the Lantern, and we had a similar situation before, then you are lacking in ways to control what the opponent is drawing.
Now, Ancient Grudge, to start with, targeting Grafdigger's Cage. I presume, Simon, that's so that you can still use the second half of Ancient Grudge later.
Yeah, it's a weird kind of value play, because ultimately you are still destroying the card you wanted to destroy. However, if you draw future Ancient Grudges, they will be able to actually deal with 2 cards.
Wow, we do see the Lantern of Insight being used to shuffle away a land there. I don't know how much of that's just simply going to be informed by the fact that you know that your Lantern might be being destroyed soon enough anyway.
It's certainly a very aggressive line, but I can see that this gives Pispa the best chances to actually win this game. However, I don't think these chances are particularly high.
Right now, Larry with just the 1 card in hand, we believe, and that means that Scavenging Ooze would not be able to attack through Ensnaring Bridge, though it will be interesting to see how long that bridge lasts. Worth noting, of course, that Glimmer Void in play only being kept around by virtue of the single artifact that Ensnaring Bridge in play. So Ancient Grudge here could be, in addition to the 1-for-1 it's been thus far, kind of a 2-for-1.
And Andronchik actually had a think there about what to do. I believe he drew Bloodstained Mire, so he's not mana screwed anymore. Has, for the future, a Liliana and a Kolaghan's Command available to him. Pispa is now in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, there is a copy of Academy Ruins in play. That does mean that there's the potential to put artifacts in the graveyard back on top of his deck, but that's a very slow thing to do, and ultimately this is the point where Jund starts to establish control. It's got a couple of creatures on the board. That Grim Lavamancer does represent damage that will not be stopped by Ensnaring Bridge. This is a problem for Larry Pispa.
Yes, and note that the Leyline of the Void actually is constantly exiling all cards that would head to the graveyard. So Academy Ruins is actually turned off. There was a Glimmer Void trigger missed at the end of last turn, if I'm not mistaken, so that might have to be sorted out here.
Yeah.
Yeah, forgot that one.
Yeah, you can see that the judge is just making sure that all gets resolved properly.
At the end of my turn.
Yeah, it's now our man.
It's a detrimental trigger.
Yeah.
So your opponent will have the opportunity to put it on stack if he wants.
Oh, I want to.
Yeah. Yes. And you receive a warning for miss trigger.
Yes.
Take care for the rest of the game.
Yeah, so that got fixed.
Yeah, I believe that the case on this sort of thing is that when it comes to detrimental triggers that are missed, if they're missed, then your opponent gets the option as to whether or not they get put on the stack retroactively. And in this case, it's a relatively straightforward case for Andronchik to say, yeah, I do want that Glimmer Void to be gone into the graveyard and, by extension, exiled.
It's a good fix, especially for a trigger as easy to miss as that of Glimmer Void.
So Codex Shredder on the top of the deck, revealed by Lantern of Insight. This is kind of how Lantern Control would need to rebuild, but There's so much already going on for this Jund deck. I'm not sure if this rebuild is going to be fast enough or complete enough to stop Jund from running away with this one. You can see extra hands pointing in at cards in Dmitry Andronchik's hand. There are, of course, basically the entire teams on each side providing little bits of feedback as necessary, just helping make sure that neither player misses something important. Bloodstained again providing a shuffle, and fetch lands when Lantern of Insight in play do mean that you do get a certain amount more control on your own draws when there's not any mill effects that are messing with that.
Yeah, though based on experience, it's still really, really hard to get out of the full lock. There is always this dream that you will be able to shuffle so many times and then top deck, but the chances for that are just incredibly slim.
Liliana of the Veil coming down, and not very many creatures to be forced to sacrifice, instead just making the Abrupt Decay in hand get discarded by Pispa, and Lightning Bolt, the discard from Dmitry Andronchik. If Liliana of the Veil does get up to 6 loyalty, quite a big problem for Lantern control.
Oh, absolutely. You cannot really let that happen. In a way, there are actually too many cards with activated abilities in the Jund deck for all these Pithing Needles to stop.
So a certain modicum of control now available to Larry Pispa. It's just a matter of whether or not he can deal with everything that's going on the board rather than the top of his opponent's deck.
And that's my problem with this board state. I just don't see how you draw into Ensnaring Bridge and keep the lock alive and deal with Liliana while relying on a single draw step per turn.
And Dark Confidant doing a last parting gift for Dmitry Andronchik, getting eaten up by that Scavenging Ooze, representing a point of life and, well, an extra point of damage from the Ooze as it gets a +1/+1 counter. And Pispa, well, that a relatively important piece of the puzzle. Codex Shredder means that he is able to find Ensnaring Bridge, plays the bridge, and he does have the Codex Shredder to deal with at least the Maelstrom Pulse on top of Andronchik's deck. We know that there's even more artifact removal available to the Belarusian, though.
I'm quite sure that Belarus wanted to draw step that Color Guns command. If you know your opponent has just drawn an Ensnaring Bridge as their only card in hand, you could have gotten rid of Codex Shredder and Ensnaring Bridge in one fell swoop.
It looks like ultimately, even though that little tiny window didn't quite get hit there, it's not going to matter too much for Belarus here.
Yeah, Magic is all about speed. There's a lot of damage coming through, though, with Raging Ravine for 4, 7, 8. That could actually be... Oh, I don't think it's quite lethal, but it's very close. Yeah, Dmitry is 1 point short of winning this turn, and Laurie is not drawing a card that gets him out of this. In fact, I'm quite surprised at the amount of Abrupt Decays we've seen. I believe this is actually number 4. And the fact that Laurie even had to Ghost Quarter himself to enable them was certainly the major cause for the board state we are seeing.
So we're seeing Lantern Control drawing assorted answers, but those answers not able to deal with all the questions posed by the Jund deck, and Laurie Pispa on just 3 life here. Tough spot for Finland. It looks like they may have to rely on the last match that's going to be going on here. We've already seen Leo Lahonen pick up a 2-0 victory over Pavel Miedvedsky's Affinity. It looks like Dmitry Andronchik is likely to pick up a 2-0 victory over Larry Pispa. And in the middle we have Matti Kuzma's Dredge deck against Bant Eldrazi. Game 1 went very, very well for Dredge. Game 2, well, rest in peace that game. And we have one more game to decide who will be making it through to the semi-finals here. Will it be Finland? Will it be Belarus? We have one game to figure it out. Do you have a preference after sideboarding between Dredge and this Bant Eldrazi deck?
After sideboarding, Bant Eldrazi has a chance. And Dredge needs to... It's almost forced to have a hand with a Nature's Claim in it to be favored in this matchup.
Well, spoiler alert, I believe that they have exactly that, but what they do not have is a hand with very many cards. It looks like we've had a few mulligans coming from the Finnish side of the table. After playing that Copperline Gorge, just 4 cards left in hand, and a turn 1 Eldrazi Temple potentially means a very scary turn 2 from Bant Eldrazi.
And no Leyline of the Void, so your Nature's Claim is might not even do anything.
Yeah, I mean, I guess Leyline of the Void we saw from the Jund deck, so we know that the hate that might come from Bant Eldrazi more likely to be that Rest in Peace that we saw in the last game. In the meantime, though, Bant Eldrazi can just deploy threats if it's not seeing anything too scary coming from Dredge.
Absolutely right. So that Rest in Peace is still a scary card because it will trigger, even if you have the answer to it. I do like this approach of compensating for the mulligan, or trying to compensate for the mulligan with the help of Life from the Loam.
Yeah, casting Life from the Loam for no value initially, but setting up your first Dredge. Eldrazi Sky Spawner, the play on turn 2 from Igor Cholonsky, getting it down just a little bit early thanks to that Eldrazi Temple, able to start beating down.
Dredge is in this despite a rather weak draw. The question is, can Dredge, for example, find a Faithless Looting when dredging next turn to really kickstart its gameplay?
Now, Matty there played an Arid Mesa, chose not to put Bloodglast into play. Why might that be?
I don't see a reason not to do that, but what you want to do, if you know you are fetching at the end of turn, this way it's somewhat more safe from sorcery speed effects, but that's really marginal.
We see an absolute powerhouse start from Bant Eldrazi here. Sometimes it's not about the sideboard cards, sometimes it's just about making plan A work. 2 copies of Eldrazi Temple, plus that Eldrazi Scion token, meaning that a very early Drowner of Hope here for Belarus. This is a great start. I'm
just noticing something. If you fetch for a red mana source here, you put the trigger of Bloodghast on the stack, and then you Lightning Axe Drowner of Hope, discarding Prized Amalgam, you actually get it back. So not returning Bloodghast the first time you could do it could give him a free 3/3.
I like this a lot. Very, very clever line of play here, potentially from Finland. They do need, of course, to get that Prized Amalgam into the graveyard, but it could absolutely happen.
After that, Dredge will be playing almost entirely out of the graveyard. I also expect to see a Dredge of Golgari Gravetoll, simply because you need all the power you can get. And then, because you have 3 lands already, hopefully finding a Faithless Looting to Dredge, in the best case scenario, 12 more cards.
I love the turnarounds that you see with this Dredge deck, and it's exactly as you called it there, Simon. Lightning Axe discarding Prized Amalgam with the Bloodghast trigger on the stack. Bloodghast comes back, Prized Amalgam comes back, and immediately, I mean, that Prized Amalgam, that was all done in the second main phase of Kleonsky, such that Prized Amalgam immediately coming back end of turn, and 5 power in play all of a sudden.
Yeah, the timing also really important with anything that has Prized Amalgam.
Okay, so this Dredge puts a Conflagrate and another copy of Prized Amalgam into the graveyard. Nature's Claim and Golgari Grave Troll are the hand now for Finland.
Conflagrate has impressed me a ton in this matchup. This has been, I think, probably the key card in a lot of matchups. The fact that you could just dredge yourself towards this spell that dealt with creatures, blockers, anything that you were worried about. Players.
Yeah, I've definitely seen it used to drop players down to just below 10 life, such that Bloodghast has haste. There's an awful lot of play in this sorcery that, on the face of things, looks like it ought to cost a fortune, but the first time round, you often just get it into the graveyard for free, and the second time round, discarding cards doesn't feel like too much of a cost.
Yes, and of course there is this inherent synergy with Life from the Loam, where it's not too difficult to stock up back to 6 cards in hand and actually fuel that Conflagrate.
It suddenly feels like Ihar Kolonsky playing a deck that is frustratingly fair, which is something that I can't believe that anyone would have ever imagined saying when Eldrazi first came onto the scene, because this is a deck that played a Drowner of Hope on turn 3. That shouldn't be something that is the fair play at the table.
That's my opinion as well. That's why I don't play Mount Eldrazi. It's too fair of a deck for me. Note that this was the first colored mana, or the first real colored mana, that the Band Eldrazi produced as well.
Ancient Stirrings gets to look at 5 cards. An awful lot of hits available in this deck. Path to Exile, not one of them, but Thought-Knot Seer and some land available to choose from. Reveals the Seer, and that one easily castable off those 2 copies of Eldrazi Temple that came down on turns 2 and 3. Now, Thought-Knot Seer does get to exile cards from hand, which is pretty convenient here. You definitely don't want the Golgari Grave Troll going to the graveyard if you can help it, but also Nature's Claim is a potential big deal here. Getting rid of the Nature's Claim means that if you do top deck the Rest in Peace, it gets to have maximum impact.
Yeah, it would have been very strong already, but of course that makes a big difference. And now the Dredge player cannot raise as well anymore because a 4/4 blocker is just stronger than what he has on the battlefield right now. Conflagrate also got a bit weaker. 1 less card in hand to discard, potentially.
Not too many dredges in the graveyard just yet. Stinkweed Imp and Life from the Loam look to be the potential options.
That's actually sufficient. It's rather the question how you want to play this, how you want to play this game, how you want to play this matchup. It looked like Finland was trying to be really aggressive, but then they didn't use the Conflagrate, for example, to deal with Sky Spawner and a Scion. Now the next question is, do you want to refuel with Life from the Loam to have a stronger Conflagrate, or do you just attack and see if the Thought-Knot Seer gets in the way?
Of course, when Thought-Knot Seer dies, it gives you the option of drawing a card, and drawing a card sometimes means dredging for this deck, and that a big deal.
Oftentimes means dredging, yes.
The Dredge, they're putting Cathartic Reunion in the graveyard. That actually one of the cards that you don't mind drawing in this matchup.
No, but because you effectively stop drawing cards so early, it's rare that you see this card appear in Dredge players' hands later on. That's why I've been talking or mentioning the Faithless Looting. You dredge that one into your graveyard and suddenly you have a free 3 mana looting effect.
Both players on 12 life here, and we know that the Dredge deck can spirit a lot of damage from nowhere. Meanwhile, Bant Eldrazi feels like it's got quite a lot of lands going on here. Casts another copy of Ancient Stirrings, looking for some action.
Yeah, and Bant Eldrazi might win this without a sideboard card. Now suddenly the Dredge player is weak against Path to Exile. The overall game plan seems to be, let's try to cast this Golgari Grave Troll, which is just a super slow approach when you're playing against such a creature-heavy deck.
So another copy of Eldrazi Sky Spawner being picked up here. Flying kind of relevant in this matchup. We've not seen any Narcomoebas yet from the Dredge player, and while he's able to block Eldrazi Scions on the ground with that Prized Amalgam, everything that's coming in the air just simply getting damage through. Kuzma now dropping below 10. Single-digit life totals as the board filling up with Eldrazi of various shapes and sizes.
Yeah, Matthew needs a good dredge here, but he's not out of it. He can still just cast that Golgari Grave Troll should it come to it. No, that's not enough actually. With the 2 flyers, he's on a virtual 1, and then there are 3 more ground creatures attacking. Noble Hierarch won't deal any damage. So without the Bloodghast to block, that would actually be a lethal attack. You can't go for that line that I just mentioned.
So are we potentially just looking for dredge as much as you can with Stinkweed Imp, hope to hit some Narcomoebas, get a few blockers, or potentially try and put together something where you can actually just get lots of damage in here?
Yeah, I wouldn't be too concerned with getting damage in, but I like dredging Stinkweed Imp. with the intention of casting it and hopefully hitting more Bloodghasts, more Narcomoebas, and then you're trying to stabilize. I think it's about time, or maybe too late to cast that Conflagrate. I was quite surprised to not see it be cast earlier, because your life total is so important.
All right, it looks like a little Stinky coming back. 5 cards going to the graveyard, and another Stinkweed Imp, 2 Stinkweed Imps, and 3 lands going to the graveyard.
Not what you wanted to see. And also Conflagrate would only be flashbacked for one.
Yeah, there's not the potential for Life for the Low making that hand especially large.
No, and at the same time you're losing a point of life to the fetch land, so I think you're just looking at lethal either way. So Stinkweed Imp, you go to 4 with the fetch land, you deal with one of the Sky Spawners, and you have the Stinkweed Imp to block another. But then you are looking at a really ugly block against that Thought-Knot Seer.
Okay, Conflagrate for 3 here, dealing with 3 of the creatures on Igor Kalinski's side of the board.
I like this better. It's not great, but it's certainly stronger when it comes to staying alive. I would probably just chump block that Thought-Knot Seer next turn. Going down to 1. I don't know if you want to do that if you are holding a fetch land, and even though there are no burn spells in Bant Eldrazi, I wouldn't feel comfortable with that.
So the door potentially closing here for Finland. This is the very final game of the tied-up match between Finland and Belarus. 1-1 in matches, 1-1 in games, and it may well be just a matter of a turn or two before we know our 3rd semi-finalist here.
I don't think Dredge is out of this. I think if you dredge some cards that we haven't seen any of thus far, Narcomoebas and Faithless Looting, then this board might go from utterly lost for Dredge to an uphill battle for Bant Eldrazi.
Kleonski is now on 9, so any more Bloodghasts will have haste. There's a Narcomoeba, there's a Prized Amalgam, there's also a Faithless Looting. All right, this got interesting.
This is how it starts. So we have the Amalgams triggering, but of course only returning at the end of turn.
Noble Hierarch jumping in the way of that Bloodghast. Their dredging looks like it's not just finished yet. Okay, so we see Stinkweed Imp getting cast, and back come 3 copies of Prized Amalgam. Look at that board all of a sudden.
Now, how do you get through? How do you deal the final points? Drowner?
Drowner of Hope off the top seems like a good answer. You've already got 1 Eldrazi Scion in play. You're going to get 2 more copies with Drowner of Hope. You can sacrifice those Scions to tap down creatures. By my count, there are only 2 creatures in play for Matti Kuisma. They get tapped down by the Drowner of Hope, and now big attacks are enough for the handshake. Congratulations to Belarus. We will see you in the semi-finals. What a finish there. This has been a very, very interesting match to me. I was looking after the second game that we were going to see lots to do with sideboard cards, but as it turns out, just the regular plan of Bant Eldrazi is able to take it, and you can see Matti Kuisma there just sort of having to have a quick word with his team, see if he can figure out if there were any other lines that could have got him out of that.
Difficult for sure.
Well, we have 3 of our 4 quarterfinals all wrapped up. Just 1 left to go. Belgium came into this top 8 as the top seed. They will be up against Panama, and soon enough we will have our final match available to get into our semi-finals. It's been a really, really interesting one. It was nice to see a few different decks in the feature match area. Any surprises for you in that one, Simon?
I didn't think that Bant Eldrazi would pull it out, but we saw one post-sideboard victory with Rest in Peace And then just this game where ultimately the Drowner of Hopes of the top did the job.
Yeah, reminiscent of when we saw JC Tao first giving us our first taste of Eldrazi in Modern. Still a very, very powerful card, and we will have just the one more quarterfinal left to show you soon enough. But we're going to send things across to the news desk now, and we will see you soon for our last quarterfinal.
Hello everyone, welcome back to the news desk. Rich Hagan, Brian David Marshall, Louis Scott Vargas here with you to set up our fourth and last quarter final. If you haven't been with us this morning, if you're just getting up in different parts of the world, welcome along. You've still got some great magic ahead of you. A fourth quarter final, both semi-finals in order, and then you'll see a champion crowned later this afternoon or early this evening. We'll see how things go. Let's take a look at the bracket and show you what's been happening here at the World Magic Cup from Rotterdam. And we began this morning with Australia against Italy. Luis, what happened in that one?
Italy won a pretty close match. They're keeping their hopes and dreams alive to be repeat champions.
Yeah, which is an astonishing, I mean, we're still 2 matches away, but even to be down to the final 4 after winning last year, that's an incredible run.
Yeah, it's very impressive. Andrea Mengucci is poised to be one of the few repeat world champions.
Absolutely. We've seen Shahar Shenhar do it in the individual tournament, BDM, but now Andrea Mengucci, captain this year, he has a chance. We went into the bottom half of the bracket next to bring you Greece against Ukraine. BDM, what happened there?
Well, you know, we have another team looking to return to the finals of the World Magic Cup in Greece. They're looking to do maybe one better than they did last year. Ukraine is a team that finished 9th last year. Look, you know, very happy to get to the top 8. And it looked like they might be able to prolong the match after stealing a game against team captain Bill Chronopoulos.
Right, Sergei Stashalski with the Titan breach doing its thing at the absolute last minute. Coming out of almost nowhere, but Greece was able to take the other 2 matches around it, and they advanced to keep their dream of improving their best result by 1 match, which would of course mean World Magic Cup champions alive. So then back at the bottom half of the bracket, we've just seen Finland against Belarus. That was another tight one, Luis.
It actually looked like Finland was going to steal it in the last moment with Dredge coming back from a Multi 5, but Top Deck Drowner of Hope is going to send Belarus onto the semifinals.
Is there a more aptly named card for a game-ending top deck.
The Drowner of Hope? No, not really.
It does seem, it's something I talked about with Simon here at the news desk, Luis, the shape of Modern is such that those very swingy interactions from one turn, you come back 2 turns later, it is completely the other way. And we see that almost regardless of matchup. This is happening all the time, not just today, but throughout the weekend.
Yeah, it's interesting how swingy each game state can be. We saw, in one of the matches with Finland against Belarus, 4 spells played into a Chalice of the Void to flip a thing in the ice on turn 3, and I mean that won the game, but you don't usually win the game by discarding 4 cards.
Right, extraordinary stuff. So we now have one remaining quarterfinal. It's at the very top of our bracket, and it features the number 1 seeds. They were the only undefeated team on day 1. That was Belgium, and they are up against one of the surprise packages here in the top 8. That is Panama. So let's take a look at the 2 teams. Here is Belgium, the 2 brothers, Peter Viren on the right, Pascal Viren with the glasses, second from the left, Jerome Baston, BDM, their secret weapon, if you like, and then there's Branko Nari.
Absolutely. Every team talked about their modern specialist. The thing about Belgium is they've only faced elimination once throughout this entire tournament. They've been at the top of the standings there. They had one match early on in pool play that was an elimination match, but for the most part, they had 2 buys. They had a bye at the start of day 2. They faced one elimination match, and then they coasted through their last round of pool play. So they're gonna face it 3 times today if they want to win this.
For sure. So that was Belgium. Let's take a look at Team Panama for you. Here they are. Saul Alvarado, a player who has been in every form of team play, representing his country famously and wonderfully for many, many years. This is his 4th World Magic Cup. Sergio Bonilla, Emmanuel Sakari, Cesar Segovia, they've got a couple of appearances between them. They are very much one of the underdog teams here this weekend, BDM.
Panamanian game stores are open right now. It's 4 in the morning.
Really?
They're watching.
That's awesome.
So kudos to everyone who opened up, everyone who's there cheering your team on. Your team's done great so far, and they've got quite a task ahead of them here in the quarterfinals.
All right, well, why don't we look at the 3 matchups that are going to determine this 4th quarterfinal. So here is the all-important matchup for you. It's Jerome Baston with Belgium for Gorio's Vengeance against Affinity, Sergio Bonilla for Panama. Luis, what do you make of that matchup?
I think Gorio's Vengeance is a touch faster than Affinity. I would rather be on that side.
All right, so potentially one up there. Then let's look at seat B. So in the middle, we've got Branko Nari with Naya Byrne against Manuel Sakari's Blue-Red Kiln Fiend, Luis.
I actually played this matchup a decent amount, and it feels like Byrne is like a little ahead, but both decks are so fast that I wouldn't say there's a decisive winner.
But in any case, BDM, that's going to be blistering.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, all the Belgian decks, by the way, are blisteringly fast. I mean, they could actually win a match in 12 turns total across all 3 players.
Wow.
A set of games, yeah.
Let's take a look at seat C then. It is the national champion for Belgium, Peter Viren. He is going to be playing the very fast Infect deck against national champion for Panama, Saul Alvarado with Bant Eldrazi. Well, I know which one's quicker, Luis. Which one's better?
They're the same deck. That would be Infect.
Okay. All right. So that's where the players are in terms of the matchups. Let's get into the decks a little bit more, some of them for you. Let's go to seat A. And for those of you interested in playing Gorio's Vengeance, we actually did a deck tech yesterday with Jerome Baston. Simon was here at the news desk with Jerome, and he walked us through it. But Luis, for those who haven't seen that yet, what's this deck trying to do?
It's mainly trying to get Gristlebrand into play one way or another. Those ways include Gorio's Vengeance, if you've discarded it, something like Faithless Looting, or Through the Breach, which you can cast sometimes a little faster thanks to Simian Spirit Guide or Desperate Ritual. Gristlebrand hits the board, you draw 7, you attack, you draw 7 more, maybe you draw 7 more. You start using Nourishing Shoal with Worldspine Worm to draw even more cards, and then you set up Borborygamos Enraged and just throw a bunch of lands at your opponent.
I've been shocked by how many times, though, Through the Breach or Gorio's Vengeance-y kind of things with the Worldspine Worms. Just getting a Worldspine Worm into play that you're going to end up having to sacrifice and leave 3 5/5s behind has been more than enough for these teams, especially against these quick decks that have some small threats.
I've seen Jerome finish off games by just Through the Breaching, Worldspine Worm attacking for 15, and that's just the game.
By the way, I must congratulate you because you said draw 7 cards, attack, draw 7 more cards, maybe draw 7 more cards, and you didn't giggle. That's 21 cards right there.
That is what the deck is trying to do.
Right. So a fantastic deck in Goryo's Vengeance, but on the other side, a very linear strategy again. It's Affinity with Sergio Bonilla for Panama. Here is that Affinity list. BDM, I think most people who've played a bit of Modern will certainly have played either with or against plenty of Affinity decks. But are you surprised by the balance of Affinity in this field? It was by no means a universal inclusion. Probably only about 50% of the teams ended up sleeving the Affinity Menace, if you like.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a deck that people probably expected every team to have, and I think if you look through team sideboards, you see answers for it all over the place, and maybe people just opted out to sort of dodge a swath of people's sideboards.
Luis, your take on that?
I think that Infect competed so well with Affinity. They both want Inkmoth Nexus for this team unified format that a lot of teams just chose to go with Infect instead.
Okay, fair enough. Let's go to the middle seat for you then. It's Naya Byrne up first. We'll take a little look at that for you. This is Branko Nurik. BDM, again, you say all the Belgian decks are fast, but you look down the bottom there, you've got your Lava Spikes, your Lightning Bolts, your Rift Bolts, your Searing Blazes. But this is ferocious to-the-face action.
Yeah, absolutely. There's some point on turn 2 sometimes against this deck where you're like, I'm just never going to have a chance to stabilize. There's just always another burn spell on top of their deck, and you just can't get out from under it. It just really pressures you.
Luis, it's very hard to talk about a breakout deck in Modern, not least because it's almost impossible to actually do that thing. But this weekend, it feels to me like the Kiln Fiend decks have had a real showcase and maybe have turned from a choice that some people will be aware of to something that really is very, very mainstream and very good.
Yeah, we saw a couple of these decks at Grand Prix Dallas. The momentum was building, but it's in full swing now. And I think that Thing in the Ice and Kiln Fiend have proven to be such powerful cards that combining them with Gitaxian Probe and Serum Visions has worked out really well.
Yeah, let's put up that list in Seat B, the blue-red Kiln Fiend list from Manuel Sakari for Panama. There it is. Just walk us through a couple of the cool interactions, Luis.
So it's got those two main creatures that trigger off spells, Thing in the Ice and Kiln Fiend, with Monastery of Sorcery being kind of like the third. And a lot of cheap spells, free spells, many Phyrexian mana spells, and Temur Battle Rage to finish things off.
Yeah, and for those unaware, BDM, you are the historian. Magic has a long history of spells in some measure that become free, air quotes, and they are among the most powerful in the game and always have been.
Yeah, absolutely. Whether you're pitching cards, whether you get to untap mana, or when you actually get to make them free. We see people just paying life for things in Modern all the time. It's a really vast resource that you have. So, the Phyrexian cards are just almost literally free, and by the time your life total matters, they're still even cheap enough that you could pay for them by tapping mana.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen triple mutagenic growth on turn 2 in decks today
multiple turn 2 kills from decks like this or other decks that are using any of the Temur Battle Rage decks. We saw a Naya Battle Rage deck.
Yeah. All right, let's go to Seat C then, and this is going to be Peter Viren, the younger brother, the national champion right now. Luis, is there anything unusual to look at in this list? The thing that stands out to me is the fact that this version of the deck is running a full 4 of Blossoming Defense, which is not something we've seen in a lot of Infect lists.
Yeah, that card varies from like a 1 to a 4 of. Playing 4 indicates that you're very prepared to play against removal spells. With 4 Blossoming Defense, 4 Vines of Vastwood as a lot of ways to protect your creatures from opposing disruption.
What is the concession to that? Because it's still a 60-card list, so for all the Infect players who are busy going, well, I maybe run 1, maybe I run 2, what are they getting to do instead?
You're missing out on some of the flex slots, whether you have Dismember or Twisted Image, what numbers of those. Distortion Strike's another card that you can often cut. All
right, well, I can tell you that the players are ready. We know already the identity of one semi-final. It will be Greece against Belarus. That'll be our first semi-final after lunch. But right now, we need an opponent for the reigning champions, Italy. Will